Well, hello everybody, and welcome. And we wish you, as always, a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night, depending on where you are around the globe or what your sleep schedule may be. PX Lip is joining me again today, and in fact, he will
Cat in hand.
cat in hand. He will take a starring role in some of the stream today. Because of some upheaval on my end, we made kind of a last minute decision to pull forward a topic we talked about him doing, and so we may still do a bit of iOS operating system tinkering. We may not. Depends on what we do with the topics that PX Slip was kind enough to suggest that he could cover today. So that's what we're going to do. And before that, I think I'm trying to think if there's anything interesting going on. We are now, about 4 days away from a potential Artemis 1 launch, so that's
Oh,
coming up
that's
next
right.
Tuesday. I think that's next Tuesday, I think. But it should be, we should be getting closer to that. Um, the one thing I mentioned that I came across that I thought we might take a look at. This came across my desk. Today, actually. This is the IEEE Spectrum publication, and I'm still maintaining my IEEE membership and my ACM membership, and so I get these newsletters. And so this is their annual survey of the landscape for top programming languages. It took me a little while. I needed, and I'm not going to make everybody suffer through the fine print. So this is a combination of surveying their members,
Hey, ODG.
trolling. Oh, hi, ODJ. Welcome. So they're surveying their members. They're trolling message boards and blogs. They're surveying or looking at job boards. So it's a combination of sources, and we'll take a quick look at that in a minute. ODG, welcome as always. Love to have you in our stream. Hope you had a good time on your end. For anyone who does not know ODG, old depressed gamer on Twitch. He does some IT streams, much like we're doing, a bit of different direction. But he also does gaming, which I don't because I'm not good at it. And he maintains his channel as a resource for mental health, for anyone with mental health issues who might need a safe place and someone to contact and to talk to offline. So very worthwhile checking out. And yeah, welcome. I hope you had a good time in on your channel today. So so what? So with these kinds of popularity surveys,
Hmm.
I always want to know what the context is, and so what they this being a relatively reputable organization. Again, if for those who joined us late, this is public an IEEE publication. It's their monthly newsletter of tech topics and IT topics. Um, and so they have actually three different weightings. And so the first one, the one that's showing here. Let's see if I make this bigger. There we go. By the way, I ran into something really funky, so I just enlarged the screen. I hope a little bit more. So I don't, and I'll sort of shout out the sort of the top things there are. So I ran. It's still working on Microsoft Flight Simulator. Okay. Yeah, good lord, I need to look at that VOD. That sounds amazing. So just total detour here before we actually delve into this survey. So I had my browser was still enlarged like this on one of the sites I had used in my stream. And PXLip, you might be able to help shed light on this. I tried to log in, so I had Code Academy up, which I had enlarged just like I did now, right? So I did the Control Plus to make in Chrome to make it bigger. Tried to log in and I got an error. Google OAuth claimed it was detecting a cross-site scripting vulnerability and refused to authenticate. I hit the Control 0 to drop back down to normal Zoom. Logged in just fine. I have no clue what on earth happened there.
That's a weird one.
That's a really weird one. All I did was basically change the rendering in the browser. But something about it Google did not like. So it had to have been something in the code that it didn't like. Anyway, so the default display here is the three buttons here. We'll jump through them real quick in a moment. The default button is has the data sources weighed towards the interests of the IEEE members. So this is an organization with a paid membership. I am a member, and so this is the data skewed towards or weighed towards the opinions and or desires of the and the stream was dropped. Yeah, there we go. We're back. Hopefully Twitch kind of settles down. They had some issues. All right, so
yeah, you went. What's interesting is that was unfortunately you went robot at the same time.
Interesting.
So that was both Discord and Twitch, which means it's not just Twitch.
Yep, we had a slight. Yeah, that's yeah. Yep. So for anyone wondering what on earth we just talked about, we have battling this issue where every now and then we have a problem of an audio problem on Discord. And yeah, so it's not my computer. And it's not my network. So what's happening is we're getting a burst of packet loss, which is what killed my stream briefly, and which
I
was
saw about another 120 packets drop.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
So I suspect it's my ISP because I checked my router, and there's there's just no. There's no spike in usage or anything like that should have led to that. I mean, I'm running like 40 megabits per second or something like that in and out of the network. So I'm afraid it's just a. I've had issues with dropouts like that kind of randomly throughout the day that looked an awful lot like routing issues. So I think Spectrum has route flaps. Somewhere where it just reorganizing routes and dropping packets while that's going on. All right, so now that we're back online, so what do this Spectrum, the IEEE members, if you weigh towards their opinions and kind of leaven it a bit with other public sources, what are their top numbers? What are their top languages? And not surprisingly, it's Python, very closely followed by the trio of C-like languages. So if you combine those, they would obviously be number one, right? So it's C, C++, C#, just right behind Python. Interesting enough, followed by Java. JavaScript not terribly far from that. What they pointed out in their title, what was maybe a little bit surprising at some level, is that SQL is well up in the I guess it's the top 10. It's a sixth one in this category. Kind of makes sense given the importance of databases and the back end of most of our web apps.
It's actually not anymore ODG. That's the weird. That's honestly, it's enterprise Java still drives the enterprise. How about that?
I think
Kotlin is now the language du jour of Android dev. So
and Kotlin is down here in the noise basically for in this at least in this version of the
It
server.
compiles down to the JVM, but
Yeah,
it is technically a different language. I don't know.
but
Now, to be fair, that is the officially chosen language. You can still write Java, so it may be that a lot of people
yeah,
do. But
yeah, yeah. So Java surprised me a little bit, except as PX Flip said, it is enterprise Java is still very prevalent.
well, Jose, I cannot tell a lie. I'm currently reviewing resumes for a position where at my office, and we put out a call for developers, web developers who with preferably with some experience in Ruby. I think 90% of them are J2EE developers. I have yet to find one who is not.
Mm, yeah,
80 resumes.
yeah,
So let's just to say that J2EE Java, the enterprise Java dev is
yeah. It's still a big
still
thing.
kicking.
Yeah. Not surprisingly, especially again if you combine JavaScript and TypeScript, they come in probably right after Java, so right around SQL.
Yeah, coming
Uh,
back to ODG, yeah,
yeah.
it used to be the only language for Android apps up until about 5 years ago, I want to say I ran into it.
Mm-hmm.
So they switched from Java being the language of Android to Kotlin, which is really just Java, just looks fancier. It's
Like
sort of like TypeScript in some ways.
yeah, like middle like almost
It's
like a middleware on top of Java kind of thing.
it compiles to the JVM. It
Yeah.
compiles down to essentially Java bytecode.
Yeah.
It doesn't. There's no like intermediate compile it to
Gotcha.
transpile it to Java, then compile it. But
Yeah.
it operates within the Java ecosystem. How about
Yeah.
that?
Let's see what other stuff is running around here. So R shows up fairly high, which makes sense. I've seen that used. I mean, it's basically an analysis language that
Yeah.
a lot of scientific applications are based
Yep.
on.
Weird.
Of course HTML.
It's
Go
okay.
PHP is still way up there.
It always will be. I have to take issue with HTML being on this list. HTML is not a programming language. HTML is a
True.
markup language.
Yeah, that is actually.
It's
I know. I'm
not.
with you. That is kind of a weird
It's
inclusion
I
here.
hate and don't get me wrong. Everybody does it. This list is not the only one. Um, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. ODG. It's markup. It's not a language. You don't.
Yeah.
There's no logic to it. There's no
Right.
control flow. It is
Yeah.
categorically a markup language.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong; these aren't the only people who do it. I just wanted to say it
Yeah.
because, well,
No,
I have a
that's a good
platform
point.
right now. I get to say it.
Yeah, no, that is. I think it's a very valid point because it is really a little bit out of place here.
hmm Well, and I think OG, you mentioned JavaScript. I think I'm curious what when you start switching the weighting,
Yeah.
what changes. But this is weighted toward IEEE. IEEE is
Correct.
weighted toward is more hardware, more low level development.
Typically, I mean that's their standard. All their standards activities are in in lower level engineering. Basically in data link layer type protocol. So makes
Function
sense.
style markups.
So the shell I would
Yep.
expect shell programming to be on the list somewhere. Ruby
Although
is of
again,
course yeah, Ruby's of course
ugh,
in there.
Ruby.
Well,
I
the
say
shell
shell is art as an awkward thing. I would have called out something more specific because what do you mean? Do you mean bash? Do you mean sure? Do you mean ZSH?
I think they made
Fish?
I think it's bash
No,
and
it
or
is.
yeah
It's just it's again. I mean,
yeah
your audience is relatively technical.
yeah.
Just dumbing it down feels a little bit strange to me.
Interestingly
I'm just
enough,
complaining
yeah,
right now,
no,
mostly
that's all
because
right.
JavaScript's not higher up.
Uh, yeah. Interesting enough, MATLAB is interesting. And I think that is. I'm curious to see where that ends up in some of the other weightings because
Yeah.
MATLAB is heavily used to model antenna patterns and RF
Okay.
systems. So it is very heavily used by RF engineers to predict, to model forward error corrections and those sorts of things. So
Yeah, I
that
was going to ask the same
makes
question
sense.
toward the end, ODG. So we'll get. I will ask that question if we haven't answered it by the end, or we will clarify that because
What
I'm curious.
what oh,
The data source.
about the data sources? Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
where did they get this data? How was it weighted? Not necessarily how was it weighted. I don't need
And
to
there's a
necessarily know
whole lot
that,
of
but
stuff there. So
Visual Basic still on there?
yeah, a little
No.
bit.
Eiffel.
So they went through. Let's see. Uh,
Okay, so they're talking about they use job listings, which is
yeah.
interesting.
So some of it is job listings. So I was looking at. Okay. So there.
Okay, so well, so there. Scroll back up for me, please. At least for one of their data sources. Oh, there it is. Hey, click on that. That works too.
Yeah.
Well, so I will, while you pull that up, I will say they specifically called out they only used two sources for job listings,
Yeah.
which is their own and one that is not particularly used for sort of your run-of-the-mill web dev
Yeah.
type. So this is on some level going to be it's going to be weighted in some interesting ways, I think.
Yeah.
I think.
As every one of these bloody surveys are
Oh,
are
absolutely.
top
It's why
top
it's why
top something listings that you
yeah.
always want to look at the methodology.
Yeah,
All right. So
it is admittedly why I like the Stack Overflow one is because Stack
yeah.
Overflow is relatively broad in its user
Yeah.
base.
True.
But yeah, I don't know. It still trends slightly
So
newer.
let's just scroll through here and see what they did. So Google searches,
Number of
Twitter mentions,
hits.
Twitter, Stack Overflow, number of questions posted mention each language for 12 months, Reddit, number of posts mentioning the languages. There's the IEEE Digital Library, number of articles that mention each of the languages, IEEE job site. I mean,
Hmm.
this is an IEEE publications, right? So that
Yeah,
makes
so
sense.
a lot of this makes perfect sense.
Career Builder, those are job listings.
Hmm.
GitHub. Um, so they look at two metrics: repositories have been started by users, number of pull requests. Okay. So that looks like what they. So that is their list of sources. So Google
I would say
searches and Twitter are the broadest ones. The IEEE
GitHub
Career
as
Builder
well.
and GitHub is quite broad, although it's more developer focused. The IEEE job site is probably most focused on IEEE member interest.
Yep.
Um, and Career Builder, I don't know anything about.
Okay. No, you're fine. I just when you finish that sentence, I was going to jump in. Uh, I had to read it three times before I really could process what you said, ODG, which was that VB is actually very good. I tried to write in VB once, and I nearly stabbed my eyes out with a rusty spoon. So, agree to disagree. I'm glad you enjoy it, but
Well,
oof.
I'll well, I'm going to say and this and I'm not going to speak for ODG, but for an old timer like me who grew up on Fortran, I did write a fairly large project in Visual Basic and found it to be quite usable.
No,
Um,
it
but
it
it is
absolutely is.
by modern standards, it appears to have modern functionality that it actually doesn't have. There are things that it appears to have like classes
Mhm.
inheritance that it does not actually have. So if that's what you're expecting, nothing's going to work right. It is very much a procedural. It's very much a procedural language. It's very much something that, if you're familiar with Fortran, actually feels pretty usable. And because I'm not an interface designer, having Visual Basic essentially automate that was my first exposure to a language that let me basically draw the user interface and then attach event handlers to the objects and let it do its thing, right? So from that perspective, it worked pretty well. And I did ODG. I did have to do callouts into C++ out of Visual Basic, which actually turned out to be quite painful, given that they're both Visual Studio, Microsoft Visual Studio languages. But the linkage between the two actually require glue routines because there are differences in string representations you have to handle, and other things that are actually that was actually harder than I thought it would be.
I, yeah, I think in this day and age, the equivalent is C sharp, and they don't call it Xamarin anymore. But there's a .NET Forms, maybe is what they call
Mm.
it. But basically, you can do what you're describing, um, in C sharp now using some
Well,
.NET
and again, the
glue.
project I did is like 20 years old. So
No,
20 years ago,
absolutely.
Visual Basic was actually a pretty
It's the only choice.
interesting.
Yeah.
So, all right. So the data we were looking at, this is where stuff came from, and so I suspect what we were looking at, if given their statement, is it weighs the IEEE digital library and the IEEE job site probably higher.
Yeah.
The second one will be the two job sites weighed heavily, and the third one, according to the text in there, weighs the what they call the social media sites, so Reddit, Stack Overflow, and probably GitHub more heavily. So let's see what happens when we switch. All right, so this is still the IEEE, so the IEEE weighted version. So here's the jobs-based version, which pushes SQL all the way to the top, pushes Java to the second position, has JavaScript right behind Python in that grouping, and then the C derived languages below that.
Yep.
Um,
That I can see that. And that explains why they're including HTML in here. Enough job listings. I'm sure IEEE probably is weighted differently, but enough folks, I'm sure, list web dev positions on IEEE that it's gonna show up as a things you should know or
and
languages
so
you should know. And
that's why they included here. That makes
yeah,
sense. So I think that's where their kind of top level conclusion came from. SQL is important, right? Because there are lots of job listings that list SQL as. And look, I mean, we've talked about game launches on this channel before, and at least one of the games Pierre Slip and I both play occasionally, which is Path of Exile. Um, I think it's a couple of league or season launches ago. They openly
oh
acknowledged
God,
that
which
they
league was it?
it was either two or
Not
three leagues.
Betrayal.
No,
Is it Harvest?
I think it was
No,
no, it was the one after Harvest, whichever one that
I don't
was.
recall. Yeah, I don't recall. But yes, it was. They
They,
they
they
they had their SQL page sizes wrong,
Yep, they
and
fully
someone
they
screwed
fully
the pooch.
acknowledged that they had an absolutely disastrous launch, with long queues and all sorts of mess, and it turned out to be a database optimization issue. It was a
Someone forgot to migrate some data on Monday. Launch was on Friday. They're like, it's fine. We'll migrate when you log in. And then their page sizes were wrong, and
wrong, and
so everybody was logging in, and it was it was
the
a right proper mess.
the database essentially locked up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, ODG. That's a good point in terms of job listings. C sharp has overtaken C and C++, which was not the case in the IEEE. The IEEE weighted rankings have C over C++ over C sharp. For the job listings, it's C sharp over C, and I think C and C++ are essentially within the margin of error and this sort of thing. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people posting job listings have no clue what the difference between the two is. I mean, the people writing the job listings, unless it's an
Oh
expert
yeah,
like
no,
yourself. I mean, the
no,
HR
and
people is like
well,
whatever.
and it, and I'll be honest, even when they come and ask me, hey, how does this job listing look to you? And I go, well, I wouldn't do that, and I might not do that. They go, and I think this makes more sense. We'll keep that part.
Yeah,
I'm like,
yeah.
why'd you ask me?
So ODJ, that's an interesting observation. So she's C sharp, because of Microsoft pushing it, probably
Hmm.
some Microsoft shops at the very least are including C sharp extensively in their job requirements. So that's interesting. I think that's where the conclusion of this article came from. That SQL is still important. It's not glamorous. It's an ugly language, but you really do need to know it. And that's, I mean, I had to learn SQL because the Visual Basic project I was doing required a back-end database, and so I had to actually learn SQL to connect to that properly. So that's the jobs weighted version, and then what they call the trending version, which is basically Stack Overflow, Reddit, probably GitHub. See what happened there. So at that point, SQL drops way down. Python is again way up at the top, followed by Java, C, JavaScript, C++, C Sharp. SQL is there, but TypeScript is way down. R is still kind of where we saw it in the IEEE version. Oh, I mentioned it. I forgot to mention, so in the fact that C is so high up in the IEEE weighted listings, of course, is to PXLib's point that a lot of low-level devices are programmed in raw C, and it's basically sort of the assembly language of today. But the job listings represent that shift, ODG, that you mentioned to C Sharp. The quote-unquote trending, what people are actually doing and asking questions about, still has C way up there. Has Java is way up there probably because of Enterprise, Java Enterprise. As JavaScript, I think where you would expect it, PXLib, because it is, so it's one of the heavily used languages. And then the other, again, if you combine the three C and C derived languages, they would kind of sit right up there under around Java's level, with JavaScript tucked in there, and then SQL, which pretty much are, with just those languages, you could build a large number of the current web applications, I think. So that kind of makes sense. I didn't look to see what the job listings. Where did R fare? I bet you it's way down in the noise, because nobody asks for R in a job posting. This is typically R typically, I think, are scientists self-selecting R as their language of choice and then going and asking questions about it on the forums, which is what the trending level comes from. Rust is relatively high and in the social media sites.
I can see it.
Where is
it's
it?
sort of it's the new hip
Yeah,
version of C.
it's way in the noise for job listings,
Yep, nobody's listening for Rust jobs.
and way in the
I
noise
think if
for
you,
IEEE members.
yeah, I think fintech um, is I think starting to lean into Rust to replace C, just because I imagine they're having trouble filling jobs.
So where is? Oh, Rust is up here. Okay. So Rust shows up pretty high. And this is where I was going to look. Where is Rust in the jobs based listing? It's way down. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I mean, take this with a huge grain of salt, or many grains of salt, I suppose, since grains of salt don't come in very large sizes. Um, ODG says Windows program mostly being C Sharp. Yes, that is absolutely correct, because Microsoft is pushing C Sharp .NET as the kind of the thing, and even shops that aren't heavily Microsoft developing shops now probably list it, which is why it shows up so much, because they're trying to future proof. And saying, well, what if we switch to C Sharp? So I think that's probably what's going on. All right, so again, don't put too much. Don't make career decisions based on this stuff, because it's just not that scientific. But think about folks like Ubik, who's looking to make decisions about what languages to learn, or how to shape his career as he moves forward. certainly interesting data points, and surprising. I mean, there were some, if you think about it, there were some fairly significant, just if you look just the movement of all the bars here, there's some fairly significant changes in kind of the
It's
rank ordering
interesting.
between those three
Yeah.
viewpoints, if you will. So I thought it was. I mean, as I said, it came across the. IEEE Spectrum came through. I think this morning. It came in my email this morning, and I always at least scan some of the headlines. They're always really good articles. I really should, now that I'm retired, take more time to read more of them. But this one kind of caught my eye, since we're talking about languages. Been talking about languages on the channel quite a bit. So yeah, so I thought this was interesting. I would post a link, but I suspect this is behind a paywall. It came up.
It's got to be right.
I don't know that I had to log in to. Um, to be honest with you, I'm not sure I logged into it, so I can. I mean, I can. Let me post it, and somebody can tell me. No, I'm not signed in, so this is actually a public article. So let me post it in chat. Yeah, so I think so I'm not signed in currently,
Huh.
so that would appear to
That's a
be
shocker.
publicly available. I think it's advertising for them, so I think there's some articles that they publish publicly. Most of what they put behind their paywall is like the IEEE Explorer library. I mean, I have access to that, to the papers in there, and that's definitely requires a login. I don't know about. I think some of the standards. I think I would have to log in to pull up IEEE standards. I mean, that's I think that's members only.
That
Anyways,
makes
so I thought it'd be an interesting idea to go through this and look at that a little bit, just because uh, again, we've had that discussion. Yeah, thanks Origin for double checking that. But so if anybody's interested, I mean, wants to look more at the methodology. I found this interesting, just because it gives a sort of um, gives a little bit of a broader view. When we had this conversation, what are good languages to start with, and so on. Most embedded system would be C, then C++. Yeah. Uh-huh. And I agree with that. I think PXLib would agree. Web is mostly JavaScript or TypeScript.
it depends on what you mean. Because if you're referring to web as the
Oh,
stack
I'm sorry. The front end, the,
yeah,
the browser embedded code.
yes, browser side, absolutely,
Yeah,
obviously, there's no
browser
other
side.
choice.
Right.
Well, that's not entirely true, but there,
Yeah, for the
for
most part, that's
for
what
the
you
most
have to
part,
do. Right.
there's no other choice.
ODG games depends, right? So the Unity game engine is C sharp, not C++.
Yep.
The Unreal Engine, I think, is C++. And I suspect a lot of the custom-built engines are probably built around C++. So since it's proprietary, I don't know. I mean, I think several of the big game developers have game development studios have their own engines, but the two big ones, Unreal is C++, but Unity is C sharp. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I don't think this survey invalidated anything that we talked about. I mean, I think the stuff that we sort of mentioned as being interesting indeed is in demand. We talked about Rust as being kind of an interesting newcomer on the block. Um, uh, okay, okay, Lumberyard. Yeah, I think I've heard of that. Uh,
The Amazon one.
yeah, that's the Amazon one. Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yes.
C++ has been sort of the default until recently, when basically with Microsoft pushing C sharp. It picks up. Do you have any sense of? I mean, I know Node.js, which is JavaScript, is one of the back-end options. Python is clearly one of them.
PHP.
But yeah,
PHP is
that was
hands
going to be my
down.
get. Oh,
PHP is
yeah.
hands down. Now, if okay, so that I can state that truthfully. There are caveats that are important to note, however. So PHP is by and large, by as far as I'm aware, it was the last couple of years, within the last few years, this was still true, is by a long shot the most common backend language in use. Now, uh, yes and no. It is slower than you would expect. Now, the reason I say that, the
It,
reason that is true, is because WordPress is still the
right.
dominant web publishing platform on the internet, period. It
Le-
still runs
uh,
something like 70%
yeah.
of websites.
Legacy,
So,
legacy implementations are very hard to get rid of. Just ask the COBOL programmers who still
mm,
are gainfully
yep,
employed today,
yep,
right? That stuff is much slower, especially if you have an 800-pound gorilla like WordPress
yeah,
being centered around PHP.
yeah. I mean, or PHP is driven by the fact that WordPress still uses it.
Yeah.
Uses it
Be,
horribly, terribly. Why you would ever write it that way? Well, that's not true. I know why they wrote it that way, but it hurts my soul every time I read WordPress code. Um, but yeah,
But
if
then,
you
but then
take,
it branches out at tentacles, right? Because a lot of development is around PHP, around WordPress plugins,
yep,
which would presumably be written in PHP, and so, it kind of
historically,
it's sort of a self perpetuating
yeah.
ecosystem for a
Now,
while until you start
yeah,
plugging in different languages, which is
yeah,
possible, I think.
yeah. WordPress supports that now. So they finally enabled what they call a headless mode, which means you can basically have WordPress serving content but not serving front ends. It's still WordPress. Um, it um, uh, I would be curious to know, and I don't think there's any good way to know it. I would be curious to know what the dominant language is if you took out WordPress.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I don't think anybody can figure out that data. It's too
So,
hard.
yeah,
But
it is too hard, and so two examples I've run into are both Ruby based. Right?
Ruby
I
had
mean,
its heyday. It's not as Ruby had its heyday. Let's just
yeah.
say that
So
it
so
didn't survive.
I think both Redmine and now GitLab,
Hmm.
which I've both used as project management platforms, are Ruby
Yeah,
based
they
implementations.
both arose around the same time when
Right.
Ruby was. Sorry, we're gonna get into philosophy now. Um, Ruby was not Ruby. Excuse me. Rails, which is the framework that is most commonly used when building a web application in Ruby, the language. Rails was revolutionary. Rails was probably not the first to do it, but it was the one that caught on and became notable for actually introducing, well, let's just say a framework, right? A structure, an architecture, importantly, to web application development, right? Web apps up until 2005-ish was probably Ruby's heyday. It was Rails sort of a rise to prominence. Um, Up until then, right, you looked at web programming as it wasn't really a thing, right? Web apps
Hmm.
weren't really this concept that you'd have word processors and spreadsheets and right everything would be
Heavens, you
on
have
the web.
Microsoft Excel running in a browser.
See what I mean? It's
Right?
like literally you can run Excel in a browser now.
Hmm.
Um, that concept, right? I mean that just
That
it didn't
that's
exist.
that's
So
about 10
web
years.
development,
That's about 10. That whole concept about 10 years old, give or take,
exactly.
by my
So
experience.
that 5 years between when Rails popped
Hmm.
and became and sort of caught on were really important in the web dev community because it took back-end web development from what was essentially a hobby, right? You built websites for the fun of it. How many fan sites and forums and things like that did people throw together in PHP because it was easy and it was
Hmm.
not a big deal, right? So much of the early web was that amateur,
Sure. I mean,
unimportant,
good
right?
Lord,
It didn't
look at
matter
the
if it went
first
down,
incarnations of HTML.
right? And but importantly, it didn't matter if it was clean. Nobody else was
Yeah.
ever. It was one, maybe
Right.
two people who were banging on it. It
Right.
didn't matter if it went down regularly because
It didn't have
okay, I
that. It
lost my
wasn't.
forum to
It
talk
wasn't mission. It
about,
wasn't mission critical. Yeah.
right? Yeah, and oh, how sad. All of the Firefly fans can't talk about, or one
Right.
subset of the Firefly fans can't talk about their show.
Right.
Life will go on. Um,
Hmm.
as frameworks like Rails came onto the scene, it just so happened that it coincided with sort of this beginning realization that mass market web applications were a market.
Mm.
Um, and so Rails provided structure. All of a
Hmm.
sudden, you could have a team of web developers. um,
Yeah, I remember front
yeah,
page. Yes.
I sadly remember it as well.
Oh,
You
yes.
could have a team of developers, and you had essentially agreed on the way your code would look. And so nobody was confused, and you could bring on a new developer, and they knew
Yeah.
exactly where to look for everything. So
Yeah.
I talk about cognitive load a lot, but that was sort of that beginning of this. Hey,
Yeah.
if we're going to build serious web apps, we really have to do it consistently.
Hmm.
And Rails provided that. And then everybody else stole their idea and did it better.
Yeah. So,
That's the truth, right? So,
so Odie just sort of half asked the question that I had too.
hmm.
If there was a blank slate today,
Oh,
what language would we see in the back end?
that is, I saw that and it was a really great question. Um, I, I don't know. I would say it,
The cynic in me says Node.js because everybody knows JavaScript if they're writing front end stuff.
yeah. Exactly. I'm going to say the realist in me.
Yeah.
Cynic works too. The realist in me says it's probably Node, right? It's easy to spin up, which, okay, so I'm gonna just pull back from answering that question for another second. The
Sure.
reason PHP became so popular is because, for better or for worse, it requires no effort to get going, right? You need an Apache web server and a module, and then you dump some PHP code in the web root,
Yeah.
and you point your browser at it, and it works,
Yeah.
right? Rails runs its own web server. To do it in production, you need enterprise, a properly graded application server. Java is difficult to deploy. Tomcat's a pain, right? So you go down that list of like it is hard to deploy most other languages as a web application.
Yeah.
Um, PHP was easy.
Hmm.
Node is
That's
similarly easy.
right.
It's like 3 lines of JavaScript to get a listener up and running that will respond on port 80. Now, it
Hmm.
doesn't do anything else, and it doesn't have routing or anything
Sure.
else like that. And then you just node server.js, and you have a web server running. Again,
Yeah.
you're sort of stuck. It's not enterprise. It's not properly production grade, and some other things. But the the difficulties inherent in it are minimal, especially because things like Ruby has to be compiled, so you can't hot update a Ruby application. It
Hmm.
has to be rebooted um, every time you make a change. So
Yeah.
my realist answer is Node.js. The optimist in me,
Yeah.
the one who thinks that maybe, just maybe, we've reached a point where the the quality of language is something we actually consider, says Rust might be a really good candidate.
Mm.
It has a pretty robust web application scene. It's the way it's structured handles persistent connections pretty well. It has async code. It supports futures. It has a really great memory management system that is
Hmm.
not
Hmm.
hard, that once you wrap your head around it, is not hard to manage and essentially guarantees that if you follow its rules, it will work.
Hmm.
So there's
Interesting.
there's a there's a part of me that says something like Rust could have taken over as the backend language and been really successful. Um,
And it
but it's a
might yet.
wonderful alternate history.
What
It
it
might
might yet
yet.
as I don't think like you said. I mean, I'm not sure that there's a lot of people deploying PHP outside of the WordPress the world
There's a there's a there's
for
a there's a decent
entirely new projects. I mean,
uh,
there,
less and less, but
the,
there is a community
there,
of PHP.
and I think that's one of the reasons why embedded application, embedded development languages don't diminish as quickly as maybe ODG you were expecting, because there's a community of people that know that environment really well, and so that's their go-to.
Uh,
If they need to be efficient, that's the language they're most efficient in.
well, I mean,
Um,
to be fair, right? That's where I cut my teeth on PHP,
yeah,
right?
of
I
course,
That's where I,
of
I
course.
grew up on. I still write it regularly in my day job. We still
Yeah.
have a number of applications that were built within the last 5 years in PHP. Now we are desperately trying to migrate away from them, but
Yeah. And for better or for
yeah,
worse, I mean, WordPress very deservedly gets a really poor security rating,
yep,
but I don't think that's because of the language, right?
no,
And so now
no,
Rust is an interesting counterexample, because even though it's very new, because it has a lot of very specific memory management kind of
hmm
guardrails.
yep,
I think it may have sort of a head start, but a lot of times a new language comes out and it's got problems. The compilers create
yeah,
bad code, and so PHP, having been around that long and not being compiled, the PHP modules for Nginx and Apache have been around forever.
yep.
I'm not saying they're flawless, but the language interpreters, I think we've probably stamped out most of the bugs in the language interpreters. That doesn't mean you can't do stupid things that
Oh,
create vulnerabilities, but
and I think, and that's what it boils down to. It's the language is not inherently insecure.
that's right.
The language has two problems. One, that it has a lot of foot guns. Um,
Mm,
there are just so many ways for you to very easily
yeah,
make your application code horrifically insecure, and and that the language doesn't make it hard to do it. It actually makes it easy to do it.
right.
It makes it hard to do it safely.
And that's where I have
Um,
some hope for us, because it's
yeah,
trying to do the opposite.
it actually, yeah, it is on the complete opposite. It is actually really hard to do something dangerous. It's not necessarily easy to do something not dangerous because their philosophy. But I
Yeah,
think I prefer that
yeah,
philosophy. Um, oh yeah, absolutely. Joomla, Drupal is huge. I hate
yeah.
Drupal with a
Drupal is huge.
passion.
What is it?
It can
Is
its
that
source code
PHP?
can die.
Is that PHP also?
Yeah,
Drupal?
Drupal is PHP,
Okay.
Joomla is PHP. There's another one I think
Because
that's
Drupal in all of its weird incarnations
Moodle.
is that's right, Moodle.
Moodle is also is
Yeah,
also PHP
yeah.
based.
That's yep, yeah.
Um, I was going to finish a thought. Oh, the other half of this is the same problem that Microsoft had in the, I don't know, the mid-aughts, when you are the dominant game in town, and for better or for worse, PHP drives some
Right.
ridiculous percentage of the world's internet sites. It behooves malicious actors to find vulnerabilities in PHP,
Yeah. You become a
because all of a
big.
sudden you
You're a
break
big
PHP
target.
and you break 70% of the world's
Right.
sites.
Yeah. So.
So
Yep.
that's my opinion. Is that I personally feel that PHP in its current incarnation is a well-designed, syntactically sound language that shows its age. It has some
Yeah.
quirks,
Yeah.
but they have done the core language designers for PHP have spent the last 10 plus years overhauling it in a way that really has made it a modern looking language.
Yeah.
It will always show its age, though, and it's why I
Yeah.
think that over a long enough period of time, we will see the death,
See
not
people moving in other directions.
a real decline in the use of PHP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. That was a little longer discussion on this article, but I mean
Eh,
that's why I
it's a
love
good
our
discussion.
streams, right? Because sometimes we uncover a whole bunch of topics, but we sort of this little thread we pull on, and the entire sweater unravels in long
We
balls
really did.
of yarn, which is perfect. I mean, I love that. We're under no time pressure to cover topics here. I mean, I can't. Hopefully, people will see the title of our streams as a guideline.
Yeah.
We may or may
And
not get there.
and yeah, Origin, it is the educational, it's the LMS is what you would call it.
Yeah,
Learning management system is
yeah.
Moodle.
Moodle is
Um,
an open
I think
source learning
Black,
management system.
well, yes, that's right. I'm sorry. The primary host for Moodle got bought out by Blackboard at some point,
Right.
which
Which
not
makes
shocking.
sense. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Uh,
oh.
oh yeah, no ODG.
Yep.
That's why we love them.
Hmm.
Pierce, do you want to tackle the topic that
Sure.
you had suggested?
Yeah.
So let me know when you're ready to switch to your screen. But
I'm
I
in
think
fact ready whenever you are.
okay, so let's switch on over.
There's not a lot here yet, so I'm gonna kind
But
of give a
I would love to get some context for what we're
that
about to
was yep.
see.
So, so recently at the office, and let me, while I am, before I forget again, let me do this. Sorry, folks, you're gonna get like a quick jump. Ooh, yeah, as the cat tries to jump out of my arms. There we go. There we go. That's a little better. So recently at the office, we were, oh goodness, what drove the beginning of this personal project? Um, I was asked to present to some of our upper management, basically monthly performance data. We use New Relic, which is a monitoring system uh, that essentially captures a lot of data. And so pulling that out is fun, and making sure that your monitors are up to date and all of this sort of stuff is always an interesting challenge. Um, to that end, I started getting really annoyed at having to go into their web interface, click a bunch of buttons, type in a bunch of things to create a new monitor or update a monitor or add tags, which was actually, I think, the driving force. I wanted to properly tag a bunch of our browser monitors so that I could use it in part of the data query, so that I had cleaner naming, basically. And I was really irritated because it was like 6 or 7 clicks plus typing the tag to get to across a whole bunch of web monitors. So I was digging around, and I knew about a tool called TerraForm. TerraForm has been around for a good while now. TerraForm is one of the early infrastructure as code tools. It came out of a company called HashiCorp, which is one of the big sort of ancillary to cloud computing companies. They do a lot of work with Kubernetes and uh, cloud computing tools. They provide a essentially a cross domain cloud management tool called Nomad, so you can manage your on-prem, your AWS, your Azure, your GCP instances from one tool. And obviously, it requires a lot of setup, but they also produced this tool called TerraForm. The promise that TerraForm has is that using, and originally it was essentially a markup language, uh, but using code, using written word, you can describe the shape of your infrastructure, and Terraform will take that as input and will go out and make your infrastructure look the way you want it to. So um, basically, you can go out and say, I'm going to describe my AWS architecture. I want a new VPC, virtual private cloud, was what I was starting with right here. Um, and I want it to have this particular CIDR block, and then I want it to have a public subnet in these 4 availability zones and a private subnet in the matching availability zones. I want to spin up an EC2 with a particular, EC2, I'm going to fill out abbreviations as much as I can and just want to remember it because it's a bad habit of mine. EC2 is a AWS VM, Elastic Compute.
And CIDR block is an
Oh,
IPv4 a block of IPv4 addresses.
yes, and typically use the 10.0 block and just what I looking at it personally, and it's a conversation we have to happen at the office, which that's a whole nother story, but that's for the office. Um, for my private AWS, if I start really leaning into some of the stuff, it's using the 10.0 block with like a /24 for the top level of VPC, and then you can break it down. I'm sorry, a /16 for the top level of the VPC, and then you can use /24s for subnets. And basically that's gives you about 256, 255 addresses per subnet and some crazy number like 16,000 per VPC. And yeah, and we can go into deeper into CIDR blocks if people are really interested, but it's basically just a way of describing IP address ranges.
Yeah, actually,
And
we'll do some of that when we get back, probably next week, into the BIOS routers.
oh,
So
that sounds good.
that'll be perfect.
Perfect. So that's Terraform. This is not pure Terraform. What this is something that Amazon, I think, started, and several other cloud-oriented groups saw the idea and said, "Ooh, we would like to get in on this." This is what is called the Cloud Development Kit for Terraform, CDK-TF. CDK Cloud Development Kit came out of AWS, and it was a way to I'll roll that back again a tiny bit. Amazon has their own infrastructure as code language. They call it CloudFormation. It uses YAML. Essentially, it's Terraform, but it's AWS specific. You can only use it with AWS, as far as I know. There might be extensions to it. I don't know. It would be slightly silly to use CloudFormation to describe your Azure environment. It may be possible. So Amazon developed CDK as a way to write CloudFormation templates using procedural languages. I don't know which came first, chicken or the egg. I'm assuming Amazon released this. I'm making several assumptions over the last minute or two. I've assumed that Amazon came out with this and HashiCorp Terraform came on after the fact. It may not be the exact order of events, but I believe it is. Um, so Amazon started with their CDK to generate CloudFormation templates from procedural code. Terraform and Kubernetes, in fact, there's another CDK-8S, came along to generate Terraform configurations or Kubernetes configuration files, again, from procedural code. So I currently have a TypeScript file because I've decided that TypeScript is the way of the future, unless it's Rust, and that's a whole nother day. Um, and I can use this TypeScript file to essentially describe AWS infrastructure that I want created. Now, or if it already exists, that I might want to change. So for running down what I have in here right now, this first block, Terraform has this concept of providers. Because Terraform is cross is vendor agnostic, you basically have to tell it, hey, I want to work with some AWS infrastructure. So you can create an AWS provider, which I passed it my access key and secret and told it which region I want to operate in. And then I can start importing what they call constructs. So for example, I have a VPC construct, which in Amazon is a virtual private cloud. And it is one of the important building blocks of any Amazon architecture. So I can create a new VPC. I think you'll forgive me, I don't remember off the top of my head the full list of things that you can do with this. But this, well, for fun, this is the list of configuration options that you have for the given VPC. And this is mapped and automatically generated from the original TerraForm provider to basically create these files, which is why everything is docs at Terraform registry, docs at Terraform registry, docs at Terraform. Um, so going back to the CIDR block, for example, which I believe is required. I don't recall if there's a default, but I can generate CIDR block, which will do what I said I was going to do, which is /16, which if I got that right, will give me a nice big hunk of IP addresses in the
Yep.
10.0 range.
Yep.
Right, and that's pretty much it. I've given it a name because it just makes it easier to find it in the UI, which we'll do in a minute.
Right.
And just for funsies, we're going to go ahead and do this. Let's see if it'll actually find it. No, my IntelliSense is being really obnoxious right now, so you'll have to forgive me. Doing manual imports, which is annoying. Subnet this. Subnet. So VPCs operate. I think you might be able to create things at the top level of a subnet. You don't, because it's a really good idea to sort of subdivide your instances, your infrastructure within a virtual private cloud to basically group similar infrastructure items. So create myself a subnet, and why this is really nice to me is because all of a sudden I have a full set of TypeScript files that I can dig into. So this is the configuration for a subnet. This describes every object, every property that I can put in there. So I have to set up availability zones. I have to give it a CIDR block. And then the important one in this particular case, and I can set up IPv6 stuff,
Sure.
is this. So subnets can be public or private, essentially. And it's just a question of, do you get a public IP address in addition to the private one inside your CIDR, or not?
Right.
So if I do this, we'll just go ahead and do this just to make sure I have it. Naming things is fun.
And so while you're typing, so to be clear, in theory, I could do these things with through the AWS CL command language or the UI, but I would not be able to draw on do it with TypeScript syntax, which you're obviously very familiar with.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, so I could write a script that basically either out of Python or whatever that uses the AWS CLI to accomplish some of the same things, but of course it would be customized to AWS. It wouldn't be. It would not be. I mean, this is somewhat translatable, presumably. I mean, you still have to pull an AWS provider, and so if you switch to Azure, it would be different, but maybe not that different.
I would be rewriting large chunks of it, but it would, like you said, it would be much easier for me to, instead of having to completely rewrite every single API call, right? Because API calls aren't going to match in any way, shape, or form, right? I could, let's find out.
I'm sorry, don't. I derailed you, which I didn't mean to do.
You're good.
I was curious what. So you're creating a CIDR block there, but what is it? I don't know how. I don't know how that's created there. What are the arguments?
Yeah, hang on one second.
Okay.
I will answer that in just a second. Actually, tell you what, I'll do this. Cool. While that's running. So, the original Terraform, they call it HCL. I don't know what it stands for. It looks like YAML. It looks very much like YAML, JSON-esque. Comes with a bunch of built-in functions. one of which is a calculate my site or subnet for me so that I don't have to come up with the correct um, incantation if you're trying to do anything more complicated than basically /8, /16/24. Um, so what this will do is, and here, let me do this. Is that gonna go to the right place? That is not, but that's okay. Sorry, folks. That is a flashbang. So this is the function for it. Basically, it will take that prefix, say I want you to add or reduce it by 4,
Ah,
and increase the least significant technically. So it's a way to basically subdivide a subnet or calculate
okay.
a.
It's kind of a weird way of doing subnetting. Okay, okay.
That's
I
exactly it.
got you.
It's just easier. It's easier on the brain in some ways
Yeah.
to sort of go,
Well, not
oh
if you're a
hey,
networking person, but yeah, so this is
for
actually
a
quite.
for a web dev,
Yeah, this is actually
this
really
makes a lot more sense.
This is really actually really interesting because
Oops, I need to stick.
I next week when I get back into the wireless routers, these are exactly some of the things we're going to look at. CIDR blocks and subnetting or supernetting. Cool.
Um, what was it? I just saw it. What was it called? There it is.
Map.
Last one. Yep. Map. Public IP on knowledge. And I don't recall if that's true or false by default. So we're just going to go ahead and do that.
Yep.
And we're just going to do one more of these just so we have it.
Now, do you know if that maps a single public IP using NAT, or is it a one-to-one mapping to
No,
that
this is
block?
actually, it is public. It is completely public. It takes an AWS IP address and hands it out.
Yeah, no, but you've just defined a block of, I don't know, several hundred addresses.
It gets
As
both.
you get
So
you
it
get
is
the same
not natted.
you get the same number of public IPs when you request that. So I
Oh,
don't think they have that many.
no, they don't have that many. They actually, sorry.
So you get one IP for that subnet.
That is actually a good question.
That would
No,
make
my
sense.
understanding is you actually get an additional network interface with a public IP address
I
when you
see
deploy
where this is
something.
going. When you
Yeah,
deploy something. Okay,
when
so
you
when
deploy an item into that
yeah,
subnet,
yeah, that makes sense.
it gets
Okay.
it gets a public IP address.
That
Now,
make yes,
the
that
thing
makes a
is,
ton of
that
sense.
means it is completely public. So
Yes.
most of the time, you deploy a very limited number of things into
Right.
public
And of course
subnets.
you probably get charged for those too.
I actually don't think public IP addresses cost you anything. Um, they charge you for enough other things that
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
they to
They
be fair, they
get you
charge you
coming and
for
going.
network. They charge you for network ingress and egress. So I think the minute you have a public IP address, you're paying
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Um, but you can create a and CIDR block, and we're going to go ahead and essentially increment our CIDR subnet. That's 16. It would help if I wrap that in quotes. Same, and then that basically goes up one. VPC ID. And then the last thing is we want to say map public IP. This is false. So this is a private subnet.
Okay.
The only thing that can talk to things that I launch in that subnet
Are
are
things in
things
the
that are
VPC.
already in the VPC.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then
This
still
is
has
actually kind of fun because this is actually easier to understand than looking at it in the CLI or, for that matter, the UI.
so much easier,
It's
right?
actually
This
a
is
lot
why
more
I
organized.
like. Yeah, this is why, in fact, why I got into this and I said, Oh, that's why. Yep, that's what's. Yup. Is that a thing? Yeah, look at that. Oh, no, it has no member. What have we got? Apologies, I don't know the name of it. I haven't had to launch any EC2s yet, so actually no.
EC2 host?
That's what I'm wondering. We're gonna find out in just a minute by doing that. EC2 host represents a EC2 host, which is not helpful, but that's okay. Again, apologies, flashbang. Um, So we are in EC2. Let's see. These are resources. I want a, that's an elastic IP address. Nope, it's instance.
Instance.
Instance. Yeah, no.
Yes, that's what
Yep,
you want.
that's the one. Yep, that's the
And I
one.
wonder what a
So
host is when if an instance is what we want. I wonder what a host is, but who
I am
knows?
curious about that as well. I will have to
Yeah.
find out. There are so many things, and I'm supposed to know them all
Right.
before the Tuesday after next. So, you know.
Oh Lord.
Yeah. Right? Oh no, it's literally just instance. So the fun thing is because they're automatically mapped, instance. There we go. And, and I should say everything. Part of the way they allow you to group constructs together, group infrastructure pieces together with this idea of scopes. So you can create multiple stacks, which again is a useless term
Mm.
without a lot more context. But basically, you create groups of structure
Mm.
that sort of are designed to be managed together, so that is you can reason about it more logically. Just going to say that. I'll do that, and then we're going to go ahead once more, do this, pull up the configuration options. And yep, AMI is going to be important. I'm just going to yoink because they already told me which one. Oh, well, that's not very helpful. Oh, fine. So what we're going to do is actually do that really fast. I don't have an ARN or an identifier for
Yeah, you need a template. You
AMI.
need a template for
Yep,
an EC2 template.
yep, yep. So yeah, AMI for those listening is an Amazon machine image, I believe.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a an image for a VM.
Yeah.
Instead of spinning up from or trying to install Linux from scratch on a VM, you basically say, "Hey, I want an Ubuntu VM."
Yeah. With presumably uh, with certain memory, with basically certain capacity settings and such,
Yeah.
size settings.
Well, the AMI doesn't necessarily have size. There are certain you can create restrictions around it,
Ah.
but an AMI doesn't have any of those. It's just the um, it basically just says this is the OS.
Yeah. So
Here are the
at some point, you'd have to specify the number of cores and memory, right? At the very minimum.
that's on the instance itself.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah. Oh, but you having to create a data structure for the AMI. Okay, got it.
I'm having to basically I'm looking up so data structures. So a little bit of a Terraform roll back, a little bit of Terraform context. Terraform has two concepts really that are important when you're creating a infrastructure code. Um, Data, which is, hey, I want you to go out to the provider, AWS, and look up this particular thing given these particular constraints. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to tell AWS, hey, I want the identifier for the most recent Ubuntu VM or the most recent AMI that has a name A and a and a creator B, right? So in this case,
Ah,
it's
okay.
name
So
and
you do
value.
kind of a look. You kind of do a kind of a real time lookup. So you basically, like if you always want the most recent version of something, you get the newest AMI, the newest identifier for the right
Yep,
AMI.
exactly. So there, and then we'll do, I would want a comma. Help if I could type.
You're better
Just
than
type.
me.
There are definitely some weirdnesses around, like some of these feel like they should, like the way that they're arrays is slightly odd, but you know,
Hmm.
it is what it is. Oh, apparently you have to grab the ID. So you could start nesting some of these, right? To get the
Hmm.
owner data. I'm sure you can get an AMI owner out of the data. So there. So this will basically have a bunch of attributes on it that map to this whatever AMI matches these filter
Yeah,
criteria.
you basically did a search. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Uh, so that doesn't capitalize. We're just going to do that to be proper. And then assuming it wants the AMI ID, it doesn't tell me. ID, yeah. So unfortunately, it's sort of awkward. You have two concepts, particularly in AWS. I don't know about the other ones off the top of my head. You have in AWS and Terraform combined, you have IDs, and then you have ARNs, and ARNs are AWS resource something. It's basically it is a unique path to an object, um, but they at some levels they become interchangeable occasionally. So so here's where you were talking about when I
Oh,
am
so this is where you're creating the instance. So now you do an instance type.
so
Got
I
it.
am creating a T3 micro, right, which is basically
Oh,
one of the
that which
smallest
is
ones.
yeah, which
It's
is what
tiny
yeah
little, tiny little, tiny little
yeah yeah yeah
VM, and we'll give it a
yeah.
tags just so that, oops, commas. Swear someone.
Gotcha. Syntax, huh?
Syntax, getting the right. It's an object, not an array. The other ones have
Yeah
been arrays, and it's just now I'm getting
yeah.
confused. It's all good. So, in theory, I can do this, and let me go
So if we
ahead and
followed
zoom
along,
in.
we created a we
Yep.
created a VPC, some subnets inside of it, searched for an appropriate machine image, basically a template, and
Mm-hmm.
launching an instance. Yes.
Yep. And the one thing I wanted to just realize that you reminded me of is I want to go ahead and tell it which subnet I'm going to put it in, right? And so
Right.
what we'll do is so I'm going to start it out in the private subnet,
Right.
which I would need to have.
TTT private. Oh,
Well,
yeah.
so part of what's really nice is that instead of having to like remember names I came up with, right, that are stored in Amazon, I actually have, oops, trying to talk and type at the same time. Um, actually, that's going to complain at me. So we're going to do a realization. It would get mad at me. Uh, the compiler wants treats warnings as errors. So uh, subnet.id. So there, I've told it which subnet it's going to go into. It should, in theory, go into our private one,
Mm-hmm.
which, you know, ideally. So um, I'll deal with that in a minute. Um, what we can do now, TF, so that's the command line tool. Um, I've done all of this right. What it's actually doing right now is generating a bunch of Terraform JSON. I'm not going to pull it up because it has my AWS keys in it.
Right.
But there's a CDK. It starts generating these
Yeah. What is
essentially
what is
generated.
what is a diff doing for you? The
Diff will
argument
tell me
diff.
what it's going to do.
Ah, okay.
So this is the plan. So this is the plan that would actually go out and do is it will perform these actions. And right, it's only creating things because nothing else exists. I think my AWS instance is pretty clean. So it's going to create that EC2 instance we talked about with this AMI ID. There's a whole
Okay.
bunch of data that's going to be known after apply.
Sure.
It is also going to, so there's a whole bunch of other stuff that's going to be attached to it in different ways. But then here are the subnets I was talking about, right? Private subnet, public subnet, and the VPC. Now this is probably in backwards order because, right, theoretically the VPC needs to be first and then the subnets and all that sort of stuff. But this is essentially just a chance for me to, that CDK is telling me, here's what I would like, here's what I
Yeah.
will do if you run this plan. So I can then do this, deploy. And it's going to resynthesize because that's what it does, but diff is useful in its own way. So again, here's the plan, exactly the same plan. I haven't made any changes. Now I can tell it, approve it, dismiss it, or stop. And so I'm going to approve, and it's going to do its thing. I've got a new subnet. I've got new VPC. It's created the private subnet. It looks like it created the public subnet, and there's the instance spun up.
Okay. That is really cool.
So now, in theory, and hopefully I'm not about to expose anything terrible. Where am I looking for? Nope, not that one. All right, folks, too many windows got opened here.
Yeah, you might look at
There we are.
it off screen before you
No, I knew where
expose
it was.
something.
It was all good.
Yeah.
All good. So VPC, yep, I'm in the Northern Virginia region. So there's my VPCs. I don't think I named it, did I? Let's see, did it tell me? There it is. 09F83. There it is.
I
So
thought
that's the
you did
VPC
name
I
them.
just created. I thought I had as well. I did. It just isn't showing it.
Okay.
That's fine.
You might have to enlarge that a little bit for us to see.
Oh yes, my
that
apologies.
tab.
Yep.
There we go. Okay, so that's the one you created. Okay.
This is the VPC I created.
Okay, now there should be two more, right? Subnets. There we go.
No, there should just be subnets, right? So
Right.
this is the VPC again. It looks like the tagging didn't work the way I would have expected, but that's okay. I've got my actually
10.01, 10.02. Yeah.
Yep. So those are the correct CIDR blocks. It's a good thing I didn't realize I had 10.00.24s shared over there. That's okay. So 51, 250. Number of IP addresses available. Why it's that short, I don't know off the top of my head. I'm guessing because something in here got smushed in there, which is fine. So if I, however,
no, those two at the top are different subnets.
Yes, they are different subnets. No, what I'm curious
So
about is why.
I don't know. Yeah, it should be
It
should be 252. No, I'm sorry,
255, right?
Only 253 are only usable. So you're missing two. You're missing two or two or three, which may be pre-allocated to.
They might have. Yeah, it's very possible.
Well, wait a minute. One of the. Okay, hold on a second. One of them. There's got to be a router. There's got to be a way to get out. So that takes one IP. One of them has
those. You actually create routers. This doesn't have a. This does not have a built-in router. It has a route table, so maybe there's something. There may be a network device that is sort of hidden.
But one of them has your instance in it, so that should be the one that has one fewer address.
That was
so 251 has to be the 251 has to be the default number. I don't know if you pull up the route table. Well, unless there's something you don't want to expose, but
no, there's the route table.
You said there's a route table.
This should be the. Did we say
this
is
just
the?
That's for the main.
This is the public subnet, so that's the route table for the public subnet. So all that does is this is all the local. This is the local
That's all. Oh, that's
shenanigans.
local. Sure.
And if I go to the other one, yep, that makes sense. This should be the private subnet. We'll confirm that. Yep, private subnet. Same thing. 10.00.16.
Okay.
That's all the local
So those are
stuff.
all locally reachable. What
So
about the public one? Well, we don't
that
have.
was exactly the same. That was exactly the same. They had the same route
Right.
table.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
So I have a running instance here. This should be the one I created. Yep, it's a T3 micro.
The micro.
It is running. So I can go ahead and look at it.
Oh, if we didn't name it, so it
There
got
it
it,
is. No,
gave it
did
a
not get
default
it.
name.
Interesting. Yes.
You
So
put
it'll
it in
give a
private.
good
You put it in private. It shouldn't have gotten a
I put it
public
in the
IP.
private. Yes. Thank you. I was very confused for a minute there. So, right, so
Because
it has no publicly accessible IP address.
I'm assuming your plan was to now switch it to public and show that you can
That's
modify
the
something.
plan. That is indeed the plan. Now, I don't know. One thing I didn't think about is the fact that changing subnets may be a destructive operation, but you'll see at least that
Yeah, it might
uh,
kill one and create
it,
create a new
yeah,
instance. Yeah, which is fine. That's what we
yeah,
want.
not a big deal.
It's
Uh,
interesting. The number of IP addresses is interesting. I want to do some more reading on where that's
no,
coming
it's
from.
it's
But
an interesting question. So, yep, everybody can see all I did was change the subnet ID,
hmm
and I'm going to go ahead and come back to here. Go CDK-TF. We're going to skip the diff. We're just going to deploy.
now it gives you a confirmation option, so it's not quite as
Yep,
dangerous as it
yep.
seemed.
No, and I knew that. I just wanted to show the diff first so we could talk about it
Yeah.
without it sitting there. So you can see one to add, one to destroy. So yes, it is in fact a destructive operation.
Which makes
Although
sense.
it's interesting. So it is technically destroying it, but it is smart enough. You can see is replacing it. So it's creating a new
hmm
one, but there are some things that are being basically preserved. Right.
It pulls some of the data it knows over. Okay.
Yeah. It retains some of it, right?
Yeah.
Um, So this, and
Yeah.
it's actually very smart. It'll tell you. So moving subnets, moving an EC2 between subnets forces a replacement instead of a modification in place. So
Yep.
it's
And
kind of what I
you can
expected.
see some of the addresses are basically shown as
hmm
this will change. Yeah.
Yep.
This
Yep.
is
So these are all.
really clever.
It's really good. So yeah, I'm pushing the plan. It's going to go ahead and take down uh, that instance. Might take a moment. Destroying often takes longer than the creation process. Yeah, because you can see it's still destroying. Fortunately, I didn't attach anything else to it, and I had a devil of a time tracking down some dependencies. I finally just gave up, totally wiped out the whole stack, and started from scratch because I could not find the dependencies correctly. So 30 seconds to destroy the instance, and then drumroll
And spawn up a new
please.
one.
There it is. Now I can come back here. Instances. Reloaded. This one's, you can see it's actually initializing. So it's not quite there yet, but it is coming up. There it is.
And
I
there's
have
your
a public
public
IP
IP.
address.
Yeah.
Now, if I click on it, it's not going to do anything
Then
because,
nothing
well,
happens. We
there's
have nothing running on
it.
it. Yeah.
But, you know, that's
That
besides
is
the point.
really cool.
I
And
like it.
I mean, I'm making a teacher out of you yet. We're exactly at the pretty much at the time when we normally wrap up.
I was going to say,
This is
I hit it almost on time.
yeah, this is bloody perfect. Well, big thanks to of course everyone is here. Big thanks for PX Slip. As I said, I kind of when I reached out to him get this set up for stream, I said I'm not really ready, and he said, "Oh, I can talk about this." So thank you very much doing that expertly on that short a notice.
My
Very
pleasure.
much appreciated. And yeah, as always, we very much appreciate everyone who joined us here live. We love we love the way chat derails the discussions into new and interesting topics. That makes this stream so wonderful to do. That's why I come back every week and enjoy doing this. So if you are here and you haven't done so already, please hit that follow button. Same thing if you're watching the Twitch VOD and find it useful. Do us a favor and hit the follow. We'd much appreciate it. I am working to get caught up on YouTube deployment, and so if you're watching this on YouTube, we would love the thumbs up, which doesn't cost you anything, but helps us out a bunch. And if you want to get informed, but know when we post new things, hit the subscribe button. And again, very much appreciate it. And with that, we hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their morning, afternoon, evening, night, wherever you are, whatever your sleep schedule may be. And we will be back. Well, we may be back. I just noticed that we had a dropout.
Yep. You gonna come back?
Is it going to come back? We may be exiting here prematurely.
Yep.
Well, we are going to just wrap up here. If you're watching on YouTube, wondering what the hell is going on, the stream dropped right at the end. Not a big deal.
At least it was the end.